Tonight, we're going to be talking about the latest updates when it comes to the ceasefire in Lebanon, what's happening on the supporting fronts, alongside important updates in the region. To begin with, Benjamin Netanyahu had a televised interview. He had an interview with Channel 14 in Israel, in which he said that we haven't ended the war. We did not end the war. We only have a ceasefire. And we are using this ceasefire, he clearly stated that, we are using this ceasefire to rearm and to start manufacturing weapons at a scale that hasn't been seen before. Now, there were indications before that Benjamin Netanyahu would use this ceasefire to rearm, and now he's actually stating it. He's stating that we are looking to rearm, to manufacture weapons at a much larger scale, and that he also instructed the occupying army, the genocide army, to prepare for a great war against Lebanon in case they have any breaches. However, the breaches have already begun, and they're coming from the Israeli side. They came in the form of Israeli fighter jets flying over Lebanese airspace alongside certain strikes in South Lebanon. There were also sirens inside of Israel that later Israel said they were activated by mistake. Initially, they thought that Hezbollah launched a missile on Israel, but later they stated that no, it was a mistake, and there were no explosions heard or anything of the sort. So far, everything states that it's Israel had certain breaches when it comes to the ceasefire, breaches that were recorded by the Lebanese army. So the Lebanese army recorded multiple breaches when it comes to Israel. They said that they targeted our lands with multiple weapons, and we are monitoring their breaches with the relevant bodies and sides. And they also added that they breached the ceasefire agreement multiple times yesterday and today. That's the Lebanese army saying that, not Hezbollah. Now, the question is, because many things haven't been really clear when it comes to the ceasefire. We haven't had a lot of clarity when it comes to the ceasefire, apart from main core things in relation to UN Resolution 1701, the implementation of it, something that indicates we're talking about a 1701, albeit in a renewed manner, without too many differences. And we do know that the Lebanese are allowed to go back south, and the Israelis are not allowed to go back north. That's for the coming 2 months, which is the official period of the ceasefire. Now, this ceasefire is officially for 2 months, for 60 days. Now we're talking about 59 days. It's not for a period no longer than that. And now Netanyahu is confirming the war hasn't ended. It's just a ceasefire, and we're rearming. And I've instructed the army to go on a greater war. And he also confirmed that it's a time for us to get a breather, right? So they needed that after the massive hits that they got from the Lebanese resistance. However, there are certain locations in South Lebanon that Israel is banning people to go back to. 3 villages, Aitarun, Yarun, and another village in South Lebanon that Israel is preventing people from going back to. But the breaches weren't necessarily restricted to these areas. Now, how is the other side taking it? And is Israel trying to instigate a response from Hezbollah so that they can go ahead? Or is it an act of, arrogance from Israel to show that, we're not necessarily going to agree to everything when it comes to the ceasefire. What's the catch exactly? That's not clear yet. But what we do know is that there is a breach. And so long as there is a breach, you can consider the other side, free to do whatever they want when it comes to the ceasefire, and also having a breach from their end too. That's the first thing. So we're talking about a case of a ceasefire, not an ending of the war. Netanyahu is confirming that he's going to rearm, and he instructed the army to go on a larger offensive in Lebanon in case they have a breach in Lebanon, that Israel is going to manufacture its weapons. Okay. Who asked for this ceasefire? Well, Amos Hochstein just had certain revelations saying that it was Netanyahu who was asking for a ceasefire. Netanyahu called me in October to reach a ceasefire. And the goal was never to completely eliminate Hezbollah. And that's a confirmation from the statements that came from the Secretary General of Hezbollah when he told Netanyahu, we will make them beg for a ceasefire. And now the mediator, who's on Israel's side, by the way, we know who Amos Hochstein is confirming that it was actually Netanyahu who was asking for a ceasefire. Why would Netanyahu be asking for a ceasefire? Why would Netanyahu be asking for a ceasefire 1 month into an escalation? There are two probabilities here, and the two could be intertwined or combined together. Well, the first one is Benjamin Netanyahu had this planned already. He wanted a very limited escalation with Lebanon to reach a ceasefire, to be followed by another ceasefire in Gaza, because he's reiterating the same thing now. Today, in his interview that he had with Israeli Channel 14, he does not rule out a ceasefire with Gaza. And that's also new. He's not ruling out a ceasefire with Gaza, but he's also confirming what he's confirming when it comes to Lebanon. We are not ending the war. We're not ending the war. But we wouldn't, we don't have a problem with the concept of a ceasefire in Gaza. Okay. He had a plan to go, escalate, reach a ceasefire that will be followed by a ceasefire in Gaza. And then if he has his coalition still intact, because now his coalition is still intact with a ceasefire in Lebanon, something that they opposed before. You see, the people pushing his government, pulling the strings, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they objected, verbally objected, and publicly stopping the war in Lebanon. It's time to go and eliminate Hezbollah, they used to say. How comes they agreed to ceasefire now in Lebanon? So that's a way for Benjamin Netanyahu to also climb down the ladder in Gaza, albeit for a temporary period of time. Again, you're not talking about anything permanent here. Even if we have a successful, long-lasting ceasefire, it's going to be temporary. But by the statements coming from Netanyahu, he's clearly indicating that he's interested in war. So that's the first thing. He would use what's happening in Lebanon to then reach a ceasefire in Gaza. And secondly, and again, that's connected with the first point, is that he was surprised by the level of attacks coming from Hezbollah. They thought that by assassinating their Secretary General and top figures in Hezbollah, that they would somehow be able to completely affect the organization as a whole, only for Hezbollah to prove that no, they are a very well-structured organization with units within the organization being able to function independently, even without central command. Although when it comes to the central command, everyone has been replaced with Hezbollah as an organization. The Secretary General, the senior figures that were assassinated, and for every person who replaces a person, there's someone else to replace them. So they're very well organized, and there's always a plan B in case any attack happens at the scale that happened when it comes to the Israeli attacks, whether when it comes to the pager attacks or the assassination of senior figures in Hezbollah. Both of these things are very important. But Netanyahu's statements are also very important. Now, the key thing to understand where things could be going when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu is what will happen to him. If he has people within his government that will still give him that security net up until the next elections in several years, he's fine to do anything. Now, with Lebanon, they showed him that we are willing to accept the ceasefire. So that's something he can continue with Gaza. But you're still talking about the same people who committed all of these crimes for the past year. It's not as if they started to change ideologies or change ways. They are the same genocidal war criminals, and they are still looking for targeting other locations and expanding their neo-colonialist project. That's when it comes to Netanyahu and the ceasefire in Lebanon and the prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza. And like I said, Netanyahu is actually saying now that he's open to the idea of a ceasefire in Gaza so long as it doesn't include ending the war. He doesn't want to confirm that he will be ending the war. Okay, that's the first part here. Well, what about everyone else? Now we're going to have to see how Hezbollah responds to these breaches coming from Israel. That's something very important. But what about the other fronts? Now they've declared ceasefire with Lebanon is not a ceasefire with us. We had a statement coming from Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansarullah, saying that Hezbollah achieved a historic victory and the support front in Yemen continues. He stated the support fronts in Yemen will continue, and likewise we had a statement from the Iraqi resistance. So the ceasefire in Lebanon is a temporary ceasefire for Lebanon. The supporting fronts are still active, both in Yemen and in Iraq as well. And of course, we still have the pending response coming from Iran. And again, Iran could be seeing what's happening and waiting to see if that is expanded to Gaza. And if it is expanded to Gaza, like we said yesterday, they could be calculating or, reviewing the intensity of the response in line with what the Iranian president stated a few weeks back. If the genocide state starts to behave and stops murdering women and children, we will consider the intensity of our response. And Abdul Malik al-Houthi said in his statement that we will continue, we will not leave Gaza alone. Unlike Netanyahu stated, Gaza will not be left alone. We will continue supporting them with all of our actions and with arms and with popular moves and with the continuation of the resistance. And that's something very important. Benjamin Netanyahu is building, or he is trying to sell this ceasefire agreement as a success by stating that we have now secluded Gaza, which is not the case. He himself contradicts himself by saying, well, we haven't actually finished, it was just a temporary ceasefire, which means Hezbollah can go back to the physical attacks at any point. That's, of course, putting aside the fact that they haven't allowed the Israelis to go back to the north, which is a key thing when it comes to Hezbollah's pressure on Netanyahu. We are not going to allow you to get your people back to the north, so long as we have a temporary ceasefire here and there is no ceasefire with Lebanon. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to get your only declared objective for your war with Lebanon, which is getting your people back to the north. However, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to spin things around and say that, no, the big success is now we left Gaza alone, only for Abdul Malik al-Houthi and the Iraqi resistance to come and tell them that, no, we are continuing our attacks against you. We are continuing our attacks against you. We congratulate Lebanon, but from our perspective, we are continuing the support, and we will continue doing so up until we have a ceasefire with Gaza. Which leads me to the following thing that I wanted to talk to you about. France, they had so many statements and an escalation when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu, and they started saying that, ICC, we're going to have to follow the international law, and now all of a sudden, Benjamin Netanyahu has this imaginary immunity. Where did he get the immunity from? I don't know. They said back when the war in Ukraine started that no, Putin is a war criminal and he will be arrested and up until we had a ceasefire, the tone was, yeah, we're going to have to respect international law. But after we had a ceasefire, Netanyahu started to have immunity. Who's giving him this immunity exactly? The International Court? The International Criminal Court? The ICJ? Did they give Netanyahu immunity? They didn't give anyone immunity. They're saying that they're doing their job. So how comes you have this immunity? He all of a sudden started to have this immunity because he gave France also credit. We still need to remain in the picture and be considered a player. Thanks to us, you had a ceasefire in Lebanon, and only for that, right, that PR stunt, we will say that you have immunity. It's, day after day, it's being revealed how the international law works based on, wishy-washy. We have a deal, okay, ICC. We don't have a deal, oh no, yeah, we'll implement the ICC. Nothing more. That shows you how some of the Western countries view international law. Now, some states have declared outright, we will be respecting and implementing international law. If Benjamin Netanyahu sets foot, he will be arrested. Other countries weren't so blatant in their statements. They said we follow international law and it will be implemented without exception. And some countries like France now, because they've had this deal, they had this recognition, are all of a sudden saying that, this man has immunity and we can't do much about it. However, regardless of what they say, Netanyahu will continue to have a problem when it comes to the ICC. It's not a very desirable position to run a country when you have an arrest warrant being issued against you. It's not good for the country itself in general. And of course, it's not good for the prime minister of that country because it creates massive tensions between that country and global countries too. And that's something that the Israeli establishment knows very well. And that's why they are now trying to challenge the ICC. They're calling them anti-Semitic. They're saying every single thing at the ICC. They're having a tantrum against the ICC. but still they are trying to challenge it. Well, if you don't consider the jurisdiction, if you don't care about, why are you trying to challenge it? Clearly, it has had an effect on Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and they're trying to reverse that. But it doesn't appear to be working so far, because they have rejected already an appeal before the ICC. All of Israel's claims were debunked with the ICJ too. It's not likely for them to have an appeal accepted by the ICC, especially following the developments that happened from the time that the case was brought up to the ICC up until now. Because what we've had is only more evidence against Benjamin Netanyahu, against the state of Israel. And that's something problematic. That's something problematic. Now, this could lead Benjamin Netanyahu to have a different thought process. The ICC arrest warrants could make Benjamin Netanyahu have a different thought process than the one that he initially had before solely. So primarily Benjamin Netanyahu was thinking about, how do I stay in power? How do I keep my government intact? How do I remain in power? And how do I get the things that I want from my career, from this political career, right? But now it started to become more about survival and protection. He realized through many stages and many escalations and tensions internally in Israel, political opponents, public pressure, his judicial reform attempts, and the unprecedented protests when it comes to the war, pressure that is still ongoing for him to have a ceasefire. He managed to go through all of these things and remain in power. Benjamin Netanyahu always has deals with people to remain in power. But now it started to become something far bigger than that. Now he is facing an arrest warrant that is not only hindering his state, but is also hindering him. If it's affecting the state, it's less problematic. But when it starts to affect him personally, he starts to have reconsiderations. So now part of his thought process, part of Benjamin Netanyahu's thought process would be how he can get himself out of this. So he will most likely now have people not only thinking about the continuation of the government post the war, and again, we're having this ceasefire after the arrest warrants too. That could indicate that there are certain things developing within Benjamin Netanyahu to try and reach these ceasefires and get things out of the way so he can eventually protect himself. Of course, there are many other things that led to the ceasefire, but it is quite a coincidence that he's having these ceasefires after the arrest warrants. And then looking for somewhere where he could stay without being arrested, or without that country complying with the ICC. And him calling it a day when it comes to his political life. Going somewhere, being protected, given assurance that he will never be prosecuted. Well, like other war criminals that are roaming around, Bush, Blair, NATO war criminals, he can be issued something like that. However, the countries that would be potentially issuing something like that for Benjamin Netanyahu, as in giving him an opportunity to flee, would have more leverage on him. Now, that's something that starts to change the equation. So the fact that he is now in need of certain global support, or support from certain countries at least, when it comes to the ICC, because again, you being a prime minister and not being able to visit so many countries, how can you operate like that? But any country who would be looking to protect him would also be looking to extract something from him. It's not like people are going to give this to Benjamin Netanyahu for free. So this arrest warrant put him in a weaker position that could potentially give even the United States administration more leverage on Benjamin Netanyahu. Because although the United States administration is as complicit, if not even more, than Israel in this genocide, they haven't seen everything eye to eye with Benjamin Netanyahu. So if he would be looking for a way out, they would want certain things from him. And those certain things could be in the form of a temporary ceasefire up until he either, tries to continue to challenge the arrest warrants or ends his political career and flees to a safe haven somewhere in the world where they'd be able to accept him, most likely in the United States of America.